The holographic display flickered to life, casting a cold blue glow across the war room. A map of Earth, covered in red zones, blinked ominously on the screen. The planet's most dangerous regions, deadly landscapes, hostile terrains, radioactive wastelands, marked as warning signals to anyone foolish enough to enter. Yet, in the center of the room, among the throng of military officers and diplomats, one human, seated quietly in row 4, had a look of amusement. Commander Jax Marlowe's eyes darted between the screen and the faces around him. The room was filled with murmurs as a senior alien officer, a reptilian figure with scaled skin and cold, calculating eyes, addressed the group. He was their guest, an emissary of the Mtrax Empire, known for its cunning and brutal methods of subjugating lesser species. Earth's survival is in question. The alien officer's voice was deep and rasping. Your planet's instability and dangerous environments make it vulnerable to our empire's expansion. Should the Mtrax conquer this world, the most dangerous areas will be made useful for military outposts. He gestured toward the map, where the red zones blinked in unison, highlighting the disaster zones. The alien spoke with authority, but Jax couldn't help but smile. There it was, the arrogance that had led every conquering species to underestimate humanity. The arrogance that would cost them. Commander Marlowe? The voice of General Amelia Trent cut through the room, pulling Jax from his thoughts. She had been eyeing him closely since the meeting began, as if waiting for something. Something dangerous. Jax slowly stood up, his chair scraping softly against the metal floor. The alien's eyes flickered toward him, his expression unreadable. You find it amusing, Commander? The alien's tone was filled with subtle contempt. Perhaps you have a better perspective on these zones? Jax's smirk deepened, but he didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned toward the screen, where the map of Earth's hazardous zones was still displayed. The Mtrax are right about one thing, he said, his voice a calm contrast to the charged atmosphere. Earth is full of dangerous places. Places where death waits for the unprepared. But those zones, they're not just hazards. They're crucibles. They forge resilience, adaptability, and willpower. And that's something you wouldn't understand. A low chuckle escaped Jax's lips. His eyes never left the alien officer as the room fell into an awkward silence. His words, though seemingly simple, carried an unmistakable weight. The officers around him shifted uncomfortably. The alien's expression soured, his fingers flexing slightly, but he held his tongue. You think you can laugh in the face of these dangers? The alien asked, his voice cold. That's all Earth is, a planet of fragile beings, clinging to survival. You are nothing more than a blip on the radar of galactic history. Jax's gaze didn't waver. I've survived places in this world you'd never dream of stepping foot in. If you think you can conquer Earth by pointing to a few disaster zones, you're making the same mistake that every other empire before you made. Underestimating humanity. He leaned forward, locking eyes with the alien emissary. If your empire wants Earth, you'll need more than firepower. You'll need to understand what you're up against. And that's something you're not prepared for. A murmur ran through the room. The tension had escalated to an uncomfortable level, but Jax's words were like a spark in dry tinder, igniting a fire of defiance in the hearts of those present. Humanity's resilience, once a joke to the galaxy's elite, was suddenly impossible to ignore. The alien's lips curled into a sneer. A bold statement, human. Perhaps foolish. But I'm curious, what is it you think you can do? What makes your kind so special? Jax's voice lowered, a dangerous calm settling over him. We fight. We adapt. And when you're about to crush us, we surprise you. I've seen it happen more times than I can count. And I've got a front-row seat for the next show. The alien's eyes narrowed. The tension in the room thickened. It was clear the conversation had shifted. The Mtrax officer no longer saw Jax as a mere annoyance. He was now a challenge, a spark that threatened to set off an explosion. General Trent stepped forward, her voice sharp but controlled. Enough. She glanced at Jax before addressing the alien. You will not underestimate Earth again. Your Mtrax may control hundreds of systems, but you've never fought something like us. The alien turned, his gaze flicking to Trent before returning to Jax. There was a flicker of doubt now, something Jax had wanted to see. The moment they began to question their own certainty, that was when humanity had the upper hand. Let's make this clear, Jax continued, his voice filled with icy resolve. You think we'll cower because you have the upper hand. But the only thing standing between your empire and total destruction is the human spirit. And trust me, it's not something you can conquer with a map full of red zones. The room fell silent once again, the weight of Jax's words sinking in. The meeting adjourned without further incident, but as Jax left the war room, a sense of unease lingered in the air. He could feel the weight of the galaxy's eyes on Earth. Them Trax, like every other empire before them, were underestimating humanity. And that would be their downfall. As he stepped onto the elevator, a soft ping echoed in his earpiece. It was a secure communication. Commander Marlowe, we have a situation. The voice of Captain Lena Ward crackled through. We've received intel. Them Trax are mobilizing their fleet. We need to act now. Jax didn't hesitate. Prepare the fleet. We'll meet them head-on. No more waiting. The elevator doors closed, and as they descended, Jax's mind raced. The time for diplomacy was over. Them Trax had made their move, and now it was time to show them what humanity was capable of. In the face of overwhelming odds, humanity didn't back down. Jax Marlowe's lips curled into a grim smile. This fight was just beginning, and them Trax were about to learn the cost of underestimating Earth. End of Chapter 1. The Argonaut trembled beneath Jax's feet as the first shockwave from the incoming Trax fleet slammed into the hull. The vibration rippled through the entire ship, rattling the walls, the floor, the very air they breathed. Outside the reinforced glass, streaks of laser fire and explosions painted the vastness of space with violent colors. Humanity was no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the right to exist in a galaxy that saw them as insignificant. Status report! Jax barked, gripping the railing as another impact sent the ship lurching. His eyes were hard, his thoughts laser-focused. They had trained for this, prepared for it in every possible way, but nothing could fully prepare them for the sheer force of a battle like this. Shields at 55%, Commander. Captain Ward's voice came through, steady but strained. Hull integrity holding, but we've taken significant damage to the starboard side. Fighters are launching, but we're outnumbered. Jax cursed under his breath. They knew them Trax fleet was large, but facing it head-on was another thing entirely. He stepped forward, his boots clicking on the metal floor as he approached the tactical console. His eyes scanned the readout, noting the positions of the enemy ships. There were dozens, each one a hulking behemoth in its own right, bristling with weapons, their heat signatures flaring against the cold backdrop of space. We're not getting out of this unscathed, Jax muttered, his fingers flying over the controls. But we're not backing down either. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. Target their frigates first, take out their support ships. Commander, Ward said, her voice lower, almost pleading. We need to think this through. If we lose those frigates, they'll have us cornered. We're too spread out. They'll pick us off one by one. Jax paused, his jaw tightening as the reality of their situation set in. They couldn't win this fight in a conventional sense, not yet. They were vastly outgunned, outnumbered, and outclassed. But them Trax had no idea what humanity was capable of when pushed to the edge. And Jax wasn't about to let that remain a mystery. Then we won't fight like them, Jax said, his voice cold and resolute. We fight smarter. The Argonaut weaved through the chaotic battlefield, dodging laser beams and debris. Them Trax ships fired relentlessly, each shot landing with a devastating impact, but the human flagship was quick and nimble, using the debris field to its advantage. Jax's strategy was simple: use their speed and unpredictability to avoid direct confrontation. But even as they dodged, the situation was getting worse by the minute. Trax's destroyer, its massive form lurking in the rear of the formation, had locked onto their position, its weapons charging for another devastating blow. Shields at 40%! Ward shouted, her voice tight. If that destroyer hits us, we're done. Jax's eyes flicked to the starboard side, where the destroyer's energy pulse was building. The shot would come any second. We're not giving them the satisfaction, Jax growled. Full speed ahead, all power to the engines. I want that destroyer in our sights now. The Argonaut surged forward, its engines flaring bright blue as it shot toward Themtrack's warship, a streak of light in the darkness. The destroyer's pulse of energy burst from its cannons, but Jax had anticipated the trajectory. At the last second, he yanked the ship hard to the right, sending it into a sharp, risky maneuver. The pulse missed them by mere meters, slamming into an asteroid behind them with an ear-splitting boom. Now! Jax roared. With the precision of a well-oiled machine, the Argonaut fired its main cannons, the weapons blasting into the destroyer's exposed flank. Themtrack's ship buckled under the force, its shields flickering and then collapsing entirely. The ship's hull cracked open, sending fire and debris spiraling outward as it erupted in a fiery explosion. But even as one threat was neutralized, a dozen more emerged. Themtracks weren't retreating, they were tightening their grip. And now, humanity had a new problem. They're deploying boarding parties, Ward said, her voice grim. We've got enemy ships docking on the outer hull. Get teams to the docking ports, Jax ordered. I want every Marine and every combat unit we have ready to repel those invaders. Minutes felt like hours as Themtrack's forces boarded the Argonaut. The sound of the boarding pods slamming into the hull reverberated through the ship, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps and the hiss of airlocks releasing. The enemy was inside. Jax didn't hesitate. He grabbed his pulse rifle from the rack beside him and headed toward the nearest airlock. Ward followed close behind, her weapon already primed. We'll hold the outer corridors, Jax said. You take the central hub. We can't let them breach the command center. Ward nodded, determination burning in her eyes. See you on the other side, Commander. The corridors were dark, the lights flickering with each tremor that rocked the ship. The enemy had come in full force, alien soldiers in their bulky exosuits, their weapons clanging against the walls as they marched forward. They were relentless, their faces obscured by their helmet visors, but their intent was clear. They would stop at nothing to tear through humanity's defenses. Jax and his team moved swiftly, setting up barricades and ambush points in the narrow hallways. The first wave of Themtrack soldiers came around the corner, their weapons raised, but they weren't expecting the ferocity of the human resistance. Jax squeezed the trigger, his rifle spitting rounds that tore into the alien invaders. The smell of burning flesh and ionized air filled the corridor as bodies hit the ground. Stay focused, Jax shouted. We push them back, one hallway at a time. They fought like animals backed into a corner, driven by the raw instinct to protect everything they built. Themtrack soldiers fell one by one, but their reinforcements were pouring in, and Jax could feel the pressure mounting. He could hear the blast doors closing as Ward engaged the central hub's defenses, holding off the majority of the invaders, but it wouldn't be long before they overwhelmed her. We can't hold them forever, Jax said through his comms, his voice strained. This is going to take everything we have. A roar of defiance echoed through the hallways as the last wave of human defenders pushed forward. For the first time since Themtracks had arrived, they were no longer the prey. They were the hunters. As the battle raged on, the true cost of humanity's survival became clear. They had no reinforcements, no allies in the immediate vicinity, and only one way out: victory. Jax knew the stakes were higher than ever before. Themtracks would learn, as so many had before them, that humanity wasn't a species to be crushed. They were a force that would rise from the ashes, no matter the odds. And if they were going to win, they would have to make Themtracks bleed for it. End of Chapter 2. The Argonaut was a battlefield in itself. The ship's interior was filled with the chaos of smoke, the echoes of distant gunfire, and the steady hum of alarms. But Jax's mind was clear. It had to be. Every second counted. Themtracks were relentless, their alien soldiers pouring in through every breach, overwhelming the corridors and pushing humanity's defenders back. He could feel the weight of his decisions pressing on him, every movement measured. This was it, the last stand. The stakes were no longer just about the survival of the Argonaut, but the survival of Earth itself. Jax had known that them tracks would test humanity, but he hadn't expected them to push this hard. "Commander!" Captain Ward's voice crackled over the comms. "We're losing ground in the central hub. They've breached the outer barricades. We can't hold them much longer." Jax gritted his teeth. "Do whatever it takes. I'm on my way." He snapped his rifle into place and sprinted down the narrow hallway, weaving through the firefight that was consuming the ship. The walls were lined with scorch marks, the floor littered with debris, and the air was thick with the smell of burnt metal and flesh. Yet Jax didn't hesitate. The Argonaut-'s core was within reach, the heart of their ship and the last line of defense. But it was also their greatest weakness. Them tracks had a fleet of warships and an army of relentless soldiers, but humanity had something far more dangerous in its arsenal: ingenuity, courage, and the will to fight for survival at any cost. As Jax neared the command center, he could hear the sounds of battle intensifying. Ward's voice was sharp and urgent over the comms. "Commander, we've got multiple breaches in the West Wing. Them tracks are everywhere. Activate the lockdown protocols," Jax ordered, slamming his fist into the panel beside the door. "We're sealing this ship up, and we're not letting them get any further." The heavy doors clanged shut behind him as he entered the command center, the room dimly lit by emergency lights. Ward and her team were positioned at key points, their weapons trained on the incoming tracks forces. "Status?" Jax asked as he crouched beside her. "We're holding, but barely. They're pushing through faster than we can handle. They'll be on top of us any second," Ward replied, her expression grim. Jax's mind raced. There was one more move to make, one final, desperate gamble. The Argonaut-'s core was powerful enough to take down the entire Mtrax fleet, but it was a risk. The destruction of the ship would cost them everything, but without it, humanity would have no hope of survival. "Activate the self-destruct sequence," Jax said, his voice steady, unwavering. "Set it for 5 minutes." Ward stared at him, her eyes wide in disbelief. "Commander, are you—" "Do it, Ward," he interrupted. "We either win, or we don't walk away from this. Humanity doesn't get a second chance." There was a long pause, a moment of uncertainty hanging in the air, but Ward's resolve hardened. "Yes, sir. Initiating the sequence now." The ship rumbled again as the countdown began. The Mtrax forces outside were unaware of what was coming. But that wouldn't last. The Argonaut would be their final message, a resounding declaration that humanity would not be crushed without a fight. 5 minutes. The countdown ticked by slowly, methodically, each passing second weighing heavier on Jax's shoulders. "We've got a full force approaching the central hub," Ward said, her voice tight. "They'll breach this room in under a minute." Jax stepped forward, staring at the tactical display. The Mtrax fleet was already preparing for a final push. But what they didn't know was that this would be their last. The final blast from the Argonaut would take them all down. "Get ready," Jax muttered to himself. "This is it." The doors burst open with a deafening crash as Mtrax soldiers stormed in, their weapons drawn. The first shots rang out, but humanity was ready. Ward and her team fired back, their weapons tearing through the alien invaders with precision and rage. Jax didn't wait. He moved toward the console, his hands flying over the controls. 5 seconds, he said to himself, his voice a low murmur. 5 seconds and this ends. The Mtrax forces were closing in, but Jax didn't flinch. He heard the sound of footsteps behind him, the enemy drawing nearer, but his focus never wavered. 3 seconds. The last Mtrax soldier charged forward, but Jax had already pressed the button. The explosion that followed was deafening. A shockwave of raw energy ripped through the Argonaut, sending everything flying in every direction. The core of the ship detonated with a force that sent a ripple through space, its light flashing bright enough to be seen even from the furthest corners of the battlefield. The Mtrax fleet was obliterated in an instant, their warships turned to scrap metal as the blast waves surged outward. The Argonaut, humanity's final stand, had delivered the blow that would echo across the galaxy. In the aftermath, there was silence. The Mtrax forces were gone. The Argonaut was gone. And Earth, though scarred, remained. It was not the victory humanity had hoped for, but it was enough. Jack stood among the wreckage, the remnants of their final battle still smoldering around him. His breathing was ragged, his body covered in bruises and burns, but there was a strange sense of calm within him. The battle was over, and humanity had won. They had shown the galaxy what they were capable of when pushed to the brink. They had survived. They had defied the Mtrax. Humanity had taken its stand, and in that stand, they had claimed their place in the stars.